All right, welcome everybody. It's May 28th, and this is the Sigstore community meeting. We got a couple things on the agenda to go through. I guess the first thing we typically start off with is a project round robin. I think in Recore and Fulcio had a couple bug fixes that have come in of late, but no major releases. Cosine the same. I think there's been a few bugs that have been fixed, but no notable releases. On the client side, there has been a fair bit of activity. The Sigstore Python SDK did hit its 3.0 release. The Sigstore Java team released the 0.9 release of that SDK. The TSC at the not last week's meeting, which ended up getting canceled due to lack of quorum, but the prior meeting, the TSC voted to adopt a project which was a Ruby SDK. We actually had a very early on in the life of Sigstore, Luke and I both chimed in and wrote at that time Ruby-Sigstore, but which ended up being the inverse of the naming scheme of all of our other SDKs, which were Sigstore-something. So it was also the first time that I think at least I had ever written Ruby code, so the quality was maybe not the greatest in the world, but Samuel Giddens, who is an engineer at Ruby Central, has been working on a Ruby implementation and had proposed that to be donated to the Sigstore community. So the TSC voted and accepted that into the Sigstore org. And as such, we will be archiving the older project, which we don't think has any usage and was much more of a POC, called Ruby-Sigstore. So we get the benefit of fresher code that's up to date, as well as adherence to our conformance testing, and also we get the naming optimization that comes with that as well. So it's a new announcement. And then finally, GitSign also had a minor release on their side as well. So any questions on any of the client work? Otherwise, we can go on to the infrastructure side of things.
No questions, but really nice to get the name fixed.
It's always nice when you know that clarity of everything looking the same and feeling idiomatic is always a nice win. On the infrastructure side, I guess two things to note. One is that we have been doing a fair bit of maintenance in the background on our backing data stores that run the logs for Recore, as well as the certificate transparency logs behind Fulcio. Maybe dive into the details really quickly. The latest release of the Trillion project, which is the Merkle tree structure that we use to hold all of the content, actually made it an update which basically changes the way that they track the subtrees within the Merkle tree, and in doing so offers pretty significant space savings. And so we were able to drop the amount of storage pretty dramatically across those logs. So we've been rolling those fixes out in staging to make sure that we understand exactly their performance characterizations, as well as doing a little bit of cleanup while we're there. We got one remaining step outstanding to actually shrink our cloud bill. Now that we're consuming a lot less storage, the persistent volumes behind everything. Unfortunately, a lot of the cloud providers that they only grow one way, and you can't actually shrink them back to the size used. So we're going to have to do some additional migration steps on the back end to take advantage of that, the cost savings behind all of that, which is certainly nice as well. So that's really the only thing outstanding, and then we'll build a kind of a maintenance window to roll that out into production. Unfortunately, we will have to take a bit of an outage to do that. Whenever you're doing database work at this scale, it's kind of hard to do it without any interruption whatsoever, but we'll publish that well ahead of time on the mailing list, as well as in the Slack channel, and we'll more than likely do that on a weekend when our traffic is dramatically lower anyways, because our traffic flows generally are proportional to the CI load that we see on public infra, which is busy during the week and then quieter on the weekends. The other thing I wanted to note under the infrastructure topic, which I'll type in here as I'm talking, is we've been doing a fair bit of work with the update framework community on a project called Tough on CI. As folks may or may not be aware, we have the trust root that's underneath Sigstore is derived from the Tough project or the update framework. And so that manages all the dynamic updates around the freshness of that trust root, how we distribute that to all of our clients. And we actually manage the process around how that tough root is updated on GitHub Actions itself. And so we've been looking to move that over from a custom implementation that we did over to something that the Tough community has actually adopted called Tough on CI. And so we've been doing some final testing around a repo called root signing staging, which is kind of similar to how we deal with our public infra. It's hard to type and talk at the same time. Root signing staging. So we're basically been flushing out, doing a bunch of validation work on the root signing staging repo, getting confident that things look good, and then we have a migration plan coming up in place to move that over to the community-driven implementation as well. So it's been a nice partnership between the Tough community and with Sigstore to get that running as well. So we should see that that plan getting published here within the next couple of weeks, and then we'll schedule that actual rollout probably later in the summer in the Northern Hemisphere. As I spent last week in the Southern Hemisphere, I'm trying to work on not being so hemisphere-centric in my words. I learned that North Star does not translate well to the Southern Hemisphere. I'm trying to use more inclusive language on that as well. Any questions on the infrastructure side of the house? All right. I'm not aware of any major updates on docs. The TSC is discussing a proposal to do some work on our documentation suite and making an ask of the OpenSSF Technical Advisory Council to help fund that work. Docs is always an area, I think, for many projects that are super important to how we engage with the broader community of users and contributors, but it is tough to, pun intended, to get the same level of care and feeding that we do on source code on a documentation. So we have a proposal that's being put forward to make some improvements in our documentation, and so we're going to request that funding to hopefully make that happen from the OpenSSF TAC. So that'll be coming out in the next week or so. So when we have a link to that doc, I'll post it back in here so that folks can take a look if they're interested. The outreach and events, I don't think there's been any substantive change from the last meeting where we called out the GitHub announcement of the public beta of artifact attestations, Homebrew, also now generating and verifying build provenance, as well as we have a couple talks coming up at Cloud Native Security Con in Seattle later next month. So I think all of those still hold. I don't think I'm aware of anything else on the outreach side, but if folks have anything, please let me know. All right, and then Ori, I see a note in here for you to take some folks through Skit. I believe that's scheduled for the next meeting, or is this meeting? Ori, I apologize for not remembering the exact schedule.
I think it's next meeting.
Next meeting, okay.
Gave myself a minor panic attack when I added the calendar invite. So yeah, I think I'm on deck to present regarding Skit at the next meeting. I'm happy to give a teaser if you'd like now, or we can hold the comments till next meeting.
If you want to give a teaser, that'd be great. I just want to make sure to put it in the notes here, June 11th, so that we all are in agreement on when. But yeah, if you want to give a quick teaser, please go ahead.
Sure. So for those who are unfamiliar, SCIT is the Securing Supply Chain Integrity and Transparency Working Group at the IETF. IETF is the Internet Engineering Task Force, and it's an international standards organization that covers standardization regarding internet standards, many different things: TLS, HOSI, COSI, OAuth. You probably have seen the word RFC. Various RFCs are implemented in open source. That's the IETF. So this SCIT work has been ongoing, and it's essentially it's very, very similar to a lot of the technologies that Sigstore relies on. So the concept of transparency logs, which were originally an IETF RFC, for certificate transparency. Long story short, the talk that I'll be giving next week is kind of covering the areas of alignment between Sigstore and various building blocks within the IETF. But keep in mind, the IETF is a standardization body, so they don't build products; they build standard building blocks that you assemble to build a product. So I'll be kind of covering the parts of the IETF standards where Sigstore can produce that artifact type, or parts of the IETF standards that are used as part of Sigstore today. I was really excited to hear about the tiles work that's being rolled out, because tiles are a really exciting and interesting kind of area of alignment in transparency logs generally. Yeah, we've been talking about them in Skit as well. So I don't want to give too much of the talk away, but that's a high level summary. Happy to answer any questions about the talk, or I can focus on anything if you guys have a specific area of interest you'd like to discuss. And Hank will be presenting with me as well next week. I also scared him into thinking this was going to be the meeting. Hank, you're welcome to give any kind of teaser you'd like for the upcoming talk.
Yeah, so what's a teaser? We at the IETF, we try to make precision insertions and not overwhelm people. Of course, we still overwhelm people by writing way too large RFCs. But in those RFCs, there are tiny little specifications how to phrase JSON and CBOR in a certain way so that can be implemented in existing systems, either for signing statements, in this case, whatever you want to do in your, for example, a total attestation, or for S-bombs or other type of supply chains that fuel value add graphs around the world. So it's all of this. I think that's interesting to mention, because IETF with the internet kind of has a natural relationship to software. So it was easiest to charter the initial scope with software supply chain in mind. But immediately when chartering, I think the scope was going beyond that. So whatever was steering somehow our tiny two little specifications for how to sign things and how to get a counter signature with metadata, we call it a receipt back, was influenced by the idea that this will go beyond software fast. But it's not useful to be like out of scope, like ignore the software world, and we start with that. So we try to make it in a way that it would be easier, we hope, and that's where you come in, to bash this hard and tell us maybe it's not so easy. We hope that it can be augmented into existing systems like the Sigstore ecosystem, for example, to some extent. And that's, I think, what the content is about in 2 weeks when we present about this. But this is the teaser I think Ori wanted to hear from me, and that's it.
Great. Thanks, Hank. I'm looking forward to the talk next time. And sorry for the fire drill making you think it was today. So apologies. Awesome. I see a question that Ian typed in, perhaps on behalf of Jeff. So you want to go ahead with that?
Yeah, absolutely, and I appreciate the runway here for this. It's a great segue as some of what I'd like to kind of bring as a premise here for a potential push to update the cosine portion of the ecosystem. And I'm typing out in chat here kind of an exact line of code to gear towards. I'm Jeffrey Berry. I'm with Lockheed Martin PKI. So one of our implementations here, we will be standing up a custom enterprise route to support what we're calling, say, a code integrity initiative. All right. And here is kind of our premise. We are predominantly a Windows-based org and relying on open source software. There are some implementations that make a whole lot of sense in some environments, but then when you go back to some Microsoft heavy boundaries for trust implementation, you can run into some interesting things that Microsoft has done. So what I've put into chat here, just below the link is the RFC 5280 definition for the code signing EKU and its implementation and usage here. So the also a link probably here to the RFC if you want to go check out the text. All right, that should do it. And then in reference also to the Fulcio CA store, there is a kind of matching line of code there related to what is the EKU bit that goes into the signing certificates that sign the ledger apparatus here. In current implementation on the main branch, it's got a code signing EKU explicit as a requirement for trust. And then frankly, in the Lockheed Martin implementation, what we would prefer to do is to use either a different EKU or to see a custom EKU here for kind of ledger signing. And the reason being, back to the Microsoft platform, including these code signing EKUs into certificates, the way that Microsoft will interpret that is it's a time of execution signature. So when we're issuing on a separate infrastructure here for code integrity to ensure our pipeline and pushes, we don't intend to unintentionally issue also something that would be like a published code certificate that would be trusted for the actual code signing key purpose. So the that's some of what I wanted to bring here to the table as a potential to maybe update the main branch. And in our mind, I think the quickest implementation would be to update cosign to simply remove the check for the code signing EKU. That would still leave the CA verification chain there for the signatures, but it would allow us to implement a custom EKU in place of code signing for code integrity use case. We're looking at something that's consistent with like a document signing there. Just simply because it got brought up here, maybe serendipitously on the call. I'm putting also into chat here a link for the Internet Association for Assigned Numbers for like a private enterprise number. Lockheed Martin, we run our private OIDs under our private OID ARC. If there was maybe a flat interest of the maintainers here for Sigstore to seek like a custom EKU, you could maybe register the association for a private enterprise number, replace with something like Recore ledger signing EKU. I don't know if something like that exists, but does the premise kind of track here, Bob, others?
The premise tracks, and I just put a link back to you where we actually do have a registration for a private ARC, and we create our own OIDs and the code signing certificates for various other fields there. So I think there's a natural kind of a extension point as you alluded to. I'm certainly like conceptually open to considering what that would look like on the PKI side. I think we want to be inclusive, but also, I think I would say we want to be inclusive of those use cases. Going down the route where we hear a lot of feedback within the community is, hey, can you just make the Windows signing pop-up go away? And can we get out of buying? Like, that's where people come. They're like, can you replace this Apple signature thing and this Microsoft signature thing? And it's like, right. That's a little bit more challenging. But I think for what you're describing, just off the cuff responses, I think it makes sense. So we'd have to just dig into the details around like, how would we do that? Would we break anybody else that's baked in certain assumptions into the behavior that already exists today and figure out a way forward? But I'm certainly open to the conversation and figuring out what makes sense there.
Sure, and I'd like to, support the justification and the, actual implemented push. I'd present two options. One is, of course, the more complicated private OID, and then the other is, simply our use case fits if we use a custom CA. And then the cosign itself just removes that extra EKU requirement. That would ultimately make the validation side more open for which type of certificate might be used or where cosign could be, implemented as a validation tool. But I appreciate it. That's all that I had to put out on the table, and then be interested in, of course, following up and continuing the community involvement through this one.
No, and so I appreciate you bringing it forward. I would say that this change probably needs to get considered at a almost at an org-wide point of view, because we have other implementations of this in Python and now Ruby and other languages as well, where I think you're pointing out the most popular use case with cosign, perhaps, but one where we want to make sure that there's consistency across the implementations of this. So I think I'd have to go back, and I don't remember off the top of my head whether this is something that we cover in the protobuf spec repo or not, but it does feel like this is a question that we would want to be consistent and implement a conformance testing to make sure that we handle these various situations correctly across the various implementations that we have. Ian, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that was the big reason why we wanted to come here, is we didn't want to fork and then try to maintain 1,000 different libraries and then recompile everyone's applications. So,
yep, makes sense. So how about this? I will take a to-do to find the right place to open the issue. I think we can certainly tee up a thread in Slack as well to bring the right folks in. Hayden on my team is probably the right person. He's kind of my PKI expert on my side that I would want to bring in on this discussion. But I know Cody, maybe you or Paul or others from GitHub might be interested as well in coming to that dialogue. But yeah, we can find the right spot to have that conversation and take that forward. But thanks for raising it for sure. All right. Any other topics folks wanted to raise? I think we either would take any other questions that folks have, or if folks want to do introductions, this is also a good time to do that. All right. Well, if that's nobody has anything else, then I guess we can go ahead and call this meeting adjourned. Thanks for everybody coming and for the engagement today, and we'll see you out there. Take care.
Bye.